Hello everyone, I'm Damien, I'm from the University of Mons in Belgium, and I'm here to talk to you about a quantitative assessment of package freshness in Linux distributions. So, as everyone here knows, there is a plethora of Linux distributions. You've got Arch Linux, you've got Kali Linux, you've got OpenSUSE, Gentoo, Fedora, whatever. You've got more than 900 Linux distributions. And these distributions ideally would want to provide to the users the packages that have that maximize stability, freshness, and security. But these three concepts cannot be maximized at the same time, because if you assess packages for stability, so packages that don't have bugs, packages that don't have conflicts with one another, packages that minimize breaking changes when a new update is made, and security, so packages that do not expose their users to ill-intentioned people, you are going to take time. And that time means you are potentially getting behind the upstream. You are not updating as quickly as possible. So distributions have to make a choice on which aspects to emphasize. And this is done according to the distribution's philosophy. So some are well known to emphasize stability or security, and some freshness. Typically, this is rolling release distributions. Now, why do we want to study package freshness? Well, we performed a survey that we published in XME last year that determined that Linux users consider package freshness quite important. We surveyed 170 people, both from online and real-life sources, back in the day when gathering was still possible. And they consider it quite important. This is also attested to by the existence on some websites of package monitoring services. So, for instance, this is from DistroWatch, where they simply list the latest available version for some packages. I think it's 3,000 packages. The survey we conducted also established that respondents will use official repositories to install and update packages whenever possible. When it is not possible, then they will resort to other means. And this, of course, carries risk, because these packages might not be examined by a third-party source. If they install from sources or from precompiled binaries, then they only have the distribution maintainers' word that these packages are secure and stable, and they do not have any test within the distribution itself to see if it doesn't create conflicts. So it's preferable to use the official repositories, but for that there need to be fresh packages sometimes. So it's important to study package freshness. How did we look at package freshness? Well, we identified the 6 popular Linux distributions, and we identified packages that were common to all of them. We looked at snapshots in these distributions. So for point release distributions, we looked at the time when they make the release. So, for instance, for Ubuntu in April and in October. And for distributions that have a rolling release policy, we use daily snapshots. So that's Arch Linux and Debian and Stable. We had an observation period of 5 years, and we had to resort to a proxy for the upstream release dates, which is the date of first appearance in at least one of our selected distributions. This is because there is no aggregate source, no complete aggregate source on the release dates of packages. So, first we looked at the proportions of packages in the distributions that do not make use of the latest versions. Unsurprisingly, we see differences. What is more surprising is the scale of that difference. It was expected for Arch Linux to be quite up to date, but here we see that only 10% of packages, roughly, in Arch Linux are not making use of the latest versions compared to proxy at least, whereas for CentOS it's 80% at least. So that's quite a vast difference. Another surprise is the behavior of Debian Unstable. Not so much the fact that it varies cyclically, because that's tied to the Debian release cycle, wherein every year and a half Debian testing is frozen in order to prepare 6 months later the release of a new stable version. And when that happens, Debian Unstable tends to informally freeze as well. New package updates aren't making it to stable either, and therefore it gets less fresh. But the surprising part is not that. The surprising part is that it hovers around the same level as Fedora and Ubuntu, not Arch, which is not what we'd expect from a development distribution for which you expect to have the latest packages so that they can be tested as soon as possible. Then we wanted to quantify the opportunity to update, which we used with the metric of the update delay, which is simply the time since a more recent update, a more recent version has been available than the one deployed in the distribution. So for instance, here we have the package PostgreSQL in Ubuntu 17.04, and we see that in Ubuntu 17.04 they were using version 9.6, but since October 2016 version 9.6.1 was available. So the package PostgreSQL has an update delay of 5 months in Ubuntu 17.04. What are the conclusions we can get to from this analysis? Well, for the most part, in most of our distributions, the packages are quite fresh. They are updated within 3 months of our proxy for upstream release. In some cases, like Arch Linux, the vast majority of packages are updated within days. This proportion obviously varies by distribution. For Debian, there's a significant proportion that takes some months, but still, overall, it's quite quick, except for CentOS, in which half of the packages have been superseded by another version by more than a year. Next, we compared the perception of users with the actual time it takes to deploy packages in official repositories. This perception, of course, comes from the survey I've mentioned before. And we noticed that, at least for the respondents that answered the question, because a third of the respondents answered that they didn't know, at least for some categories of packages. But for those that answered, in general, they have a pretty good idea, actually, of the time it takes to deploy package updates. So, for instance, Arch users thought it took a few days, and it does take a few days. Debian stable users thought it would take a few months, and for the majority of packages, it takes less than half a year. So that's quite accurate, except for CentOS users that are quite a bit generous in that they think it takes only a few months, and we have seen that at least half are outdated by over a year. Then we wanted to rank the distributions from freshest to least fresh. We did that by looking at every package. And let's say we had version 1.0.0 of a package in CentOS and 1.1.5 in Debian stable and 1.3.12 in all other distributions. Well, in that case, we would say that CentOS is the least fresh, then Debian stable, and then all others are tied for first. So we did that for every package and we aggregated, and that's the table on the slide. Unsurprisingly, Arch Linux is for most packages at least as fresh as all other distributions. Then we get a group of 3 distributions that might look a bit different on the slide, but that we cannot differentiate statistically. So it's Unstable, Fedora, and Ubuntu. Then stable, and finally CentOS, for which 71% of packages are using older versions than all the other distributions. So it's not only older than, say, Arch, but also older than the versions found in Debian stable. So that's quite significant. So in conclusion, Linux users consider it important to keep their packages fresh, and they will rely on official repositories whenever they can. So it's important for the packages in these repositories to be fresh. We have analyzed the freshness of packages in 6 popular Linux distributions, and we found that there are vast discrepancies between them. We also found that the perception of users of package freshness is, for the most part, quite accurate. Still, there is a large contingent of users that do not know what time it takes to deploy packages in their distributions. So it's still useful to inform them about it. As for future work, we would like to examine whether distribution-agnostic package managers, such as Flatpak, constitute a viable alternative source of packages and package updates in the case where the package in the distributions, official repositories, are not quite up to date, and whether they do not expose you to risks that you wouldn't have if you used your distribution's official repositories. We'd also like to examine the trade-offs between freshness, security, and stability, because when you introduce new versions, you introduce new features, which users tend to want. You introduce bug fixes and security patches, but there is a risk to introduce new bugs and vulnerabilities. In fact, it's probably not ideal from a security or stability standpoint to use the latest version, because it will have undiscovered issues. So the ideal might not be the latest, and we have to see what the trade-offs are in that respect. And finally, we'd like to constitute a historical database of the package versions deployed in distributions and of the upstream release dates of packages, because that data is not readily available, which complicates research. So it would help researchers a lot to constitute that database. That's it for me. Are there any questions?